I want to thank everybody who's here for taking the time to be here to discuss something that's incredibly important, the proposed Isolated Confinement Restriction Act bill. And before we talk about that, I want to take some time to make some important introductions here. My name is Nicolette Ward. I'm an associate attorney with Romanucci and Blandin. Sitting here immediately to my right is Sarah Grady, an an attorney at the law firm of Lovey and Lovey. And sitting next to Sarah is a gentleman who we are very proud to represent along with the MacArthur Justice Center, and that gentleman is Anthony Gay. Anthony spent more than 20 years lost in solitary confinement in the Illinois Department of Corrections. We're also very proud and honored today to have with us Representative Shawn Ford of Illinois' 8th District, who sponsors the Isolated Confinement Restriction Act. Anthony and Representative Ford are going to have the opportunity to speak a little bit with you about the bill and about why that bill is so vital for this time. And after that, Representative Ford and I are going to be happy to take your questions. We're here today because the practice of solitary confinement absolutely must be reformed immediately. It is a dehumanizing and destructive practice. And many Illinois residents may not be fully aware, but study after study after study has made it absolutely clear that long-term solitary confinement is devastating to mental health. It can be devastating to people without mental health challenges. For someone with mental health challenges, solitary confinement is torture. The reality of solitary confinement is 22 to 23 hours of isolation from other humans. And this is taking place in cells the size of parking spaces or smaller. No windows, no way to see out of the cell. That was Anthony's life for about 20 years, beginning when he was just 20 years old. Now, about 80% of inmates in solitary confinement in isolation in Illinois are mentally ill. And that was Anthony's case. The Illinois Department of Corrections is the largest provider for mental health services in the state of Illinois. The IDOC has known for more than 20 years how isolated confinement strips inmates of their humanity. They've known for 20 years that they've been torturing the mentally ill. Courts have been clear. Putting somebody mentally ill in solitary confinement is like putting an asthmatic in a place with little air to breathe. And for somebody like Anthony, it was like drowning him. They held Anthony underwater for 20 years, and they pushed him down again when he tried to come up for air to breathe. When solitary confinement caused Anthony's state to deteriorate, they punished him for becoming sicker and sicker with more time in solitary confinement. In all, Anthony was given 150 years in solitary. The IDOC was prepared to let Anthony spend the rest of his life in isolation away from other humans. The IDOC was prepared to let Anthony Gay die in solitary confinement. Solitary confinement and mental illness are a vicious cycle that the IDOC has known about and ignored for years, and it's a cycle that we hope that this bill is going to bring to an end. Prolonged solitary confinement has absolutely no place in any civilized justice system, and solitary confinement has no place in Illinois in the year 2020. Now, Anthony endured torture, and in 2019, we filed suit on behalf to vindicate his constitutional rights. That suit is ongoing in the Central District of Illinois. We recently amended that lawsuit to include current IDOC Director Rob Jeffries and several of the wardens who let Anthony rot for so long in solitary confinement. This bill that we're here to discuss today is vital because it could provide desperately needed accountability and oversight that's been lacking for so long. More importantly, it could have spared Anthony the torture that he endured for 20 years. We have the opportunity here today to prevent further torture. Now, I want to let Anthony now describe and give to you a statement in his own words about his experience in solitary confinement and what this bill could mean, not just to him, but to the other people that are still in solitary confinement today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad that you could make it. We are here today to inform everyone in Illinois that we have two primary choices in life. We can accept things as they are, or we can accept responsibility to change them. We have decided to accept responsibility to change them. I spent 22 years I spent 22 years in solitary confinement in Illinois prisons. It was psychologically darker than the inside of a cow. I was trapped in a cell smaller than the size of a parking space, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was torture. The only way I received social stimulation and our human contact was when I cut my neck, my legs, my arms, and my private parts. How could this be? When the conditions of confinement were psychologically eating me inside out, instead of being removed from solitary confinement and offered adequate psychological counseling, I was prosecuted, given 100 years, and buried deeper in solitary confinement for symptoms of mental illness that solitary confinement created. In fact, I was scheduled to die in solitary confinement. Fortunately, Scott May, Jennifer Sobel, and the powerful Northwestern College threw me a rope of hope and rescued me. Unfortunately, the psychological nightmare doesn't end there. Many men and women are still trapped in solitary confinement in Illinois. We must throw them a rope of hope and rescue those still lost and trapped in the ditch of solitary confinement. I remember reading this article about black holes. It stated in pertinent part, supermassive black holes are situated at the center of most galaxies, including ours, and are so dense that nothing, not even light, can escape their gravitational pull. Light gets bent and twisted around gravity. This reminds me of solitary confinement, where you get psychologically bent and twisted by this immense psychological pain that can only be alleviated via physical pain. This is sad, horrible, and despicable. Sadly, the black hole of solitary confinement is difficult to understand, just like black holes situated at the center of most galaxies. Nonetheless, solitary confinement, like black holes, is real. And like Stephen Hawking, shedding new light on the darkest regions of space and time, my mission is to shed new light on the ill effects of solitary confinement and encourage the people to act. In turn, with the help of Representative Shawn Ford, we have a bill to put a limit on solitary confinement. Albert Einstein once said, the difference between genius and stupidity is genius has its limits. So we're going to ask the representatives and senators to put a limit on solitary confinement. In conclusion, to every prisoner I know who are in solitary confinement, suffering, who thought I would get out and forget about you, I didn't. I did my part. Now it's up to our moving and compelling representatives and senators to make limitation on solitary confinement a reality.
I want to thank Anthony very much for his story and for sharing it with all of you and continuing to fight in the way that he has. I have the great opportunity now of introducing somebody else who's fighting tirelessly for the inmates that are still in solitary confinement, and that is Representative Shawn Ford, who's the sponsor of the bill that we're here to discuss today.
Good morning. First, I want to thank Jennifer for helping us put this all together. This is fascinating, and it's exactly what we need. And I also want to thank the law firm of Romanucci and Blandin for taking on this cause, because truly this is not one that will benefit their bottom line if we fix this. If we fix this, there goes the lawsuits that could be levied against the state. But they believe that this is too inhumane for it to continue, and they're willing to sacrifice money in their law firm to have a humane state. And I have to thank the Tribune, Stacy Sinclair. I mean, it was her story that I believe gave this issue hope. I think he said a rope of hope, because it was that story that I read when Mr. Anthony Gay came to Springfield. I remember the story, and I was hoping to meet him one day, and I did. So thank you, Chicago Tribune, and especially Stacy Sinclair. And also the attorney Blanchard Ward. I think that the respect that you have for Anthony is giving him the hope that he needs to continue. So thank you all of the attorneys here for doing it and respecting Mr. Gay through this struggle. There's nothing that I could say that should be remembered more than what Mr. Gay said. But what I could do is offer my assistance, and that's what I'm here today to announce, the Anthony Gay Isolated Confinement Restriction Act, which will provide people in prison with protections regarding isolated confinement by setting additional limitations and guidelines. The Anthony Gay law would make sure that there is a limit in the maximum amount of time a person in prison may spend in isolated confinement. It will restrict it to 10 consecutive days, and 10 days in a 180 day period. The anti-gay law would require inmates in isolated confinement to have access to activities, including but not limited to job assignments, classes, meals, recreation, medical appointments, visits, and therapy. The anti-gay law would permit isolated confinement for those that believe that they need to be in protective custody. And it would also allow for those that believe that they would like to be out of protective custody to voluntarily write a letter to be removed. The anti-gay law would require the Department of Corrections to produce quarterly reports on their website regarding the use of isolated confinement, solitary confinement, that includes the demographics of the people in prison that have been confined, and also issue the explanation for why they were confined. These reports should not be included with the person's identity. So the person's identity will not be revealed, just the reasons why they have been in confinement. Currently, in Illinois, isolated confinement or solitary confinement and segregation are required by the Illinois Administrative Code. The code grants correctional facilities the discretion to isolate or segregate inmates for different ranges of time according to the inmate's criminal disciplinary history and whatever they feel is necessary at the jail. However, the code does not establish a maximum period of isolated confinement for segregation. And so we're here today to support the movement that Anthony Gay has started in Illinois and urge the governor, urge the state representatives, and urge the senators to support the Anthony Gay's restrictive law for solitary confinement. In closing, I just have to say, when I met Anthony Gay, and I mean, he has my cell phone number, and I have to say that meeting him, I just fell in love with him. And it's very, very difficult to find people that's been in the struggle to fight for other people when they have found their hope. So I want to thank you, Mr. Gay, for being the leader and fighting for the people that are still looking for the hope. And because of you, Illinois will pass a bill that will restrict the time people spend in solitary confinement in Illinois. Thank you, Mr. Gay.
I want to thank you very much, Representative Ford, for speaking up and being a warrior on behalf of this issue. Right now, we're happy to take your questions. However, Anthony's been courageous enough to tell his story, and so we're going to ask that Anthony not answer any questions at this time.
Can you just talk to someone a little about the transparency aspect of the bill and what that means? I mean, I know it's like the least sexiest part of it, but it's an important part of it.
Well, it's the transparency aspect is an absolutely vital part of this bill. As I touched on before, we think that aspect is going to have it's going to provide transparency and oversight to not just the number of people in confinement, but most importantly, the kind of treatment they're receiving. That kind of oversight, candidly, could have prevented what happened to Anthony. Right now, as it stands, we don't know how many Anthony Gays are in the system. We just don't know. And this bill is going to make sure that not only do we know what kind of treatment those individuals are receiving, when they're receiving it, and what the reason is that those people are being placed in confinement. And we think that's an incredibly important first step to preventing this ongoing issue. Yes?
What's the timeline for getting the bill considered?
I'm gonna defer that one to Representative Ford.
We have a timeline. Hopefully, we could pass this before the end of March in the House to move it over to the Senate. We have a strong, compelling argument with Mr. Gay, and I think that we have a very liberal governor that believes in change like this. And with the story in Chicago Tribune and this group here pushing, I think that's what it takes. I mean, people fight for a long time for change, but there's a moment when it's right. And Mr. Gay has come forward and he has made the moment right. So we believe that it should pass the House before the end of March, move to the Senate, and be on the governor's desk before May 31st.
What can colleges and universities do to help you?
Yeah.
I think colleges and universities can help by continuing to raise awareness. I know something Anthony has told me over and over again is that the greatest catalyst for change is that kind of human contact and that kind of one-on-one human awareness. I think continuing to spread not just Anthony's story, but information about the horrors of solitary confinement can go a long way. A lot of people in Illinois aren't aware how severe this issue is. It's something they just don't have a lot of one-on-one contact with. And so I think not just universities and colleges, but I think everyone everywhere has the opportunity to help this bill by raising awareness.
And one of the things that colleges, I mean, you have a strong base of savvy tech people that could start a real strong movement about changing the law on the solitary confinement. And so the message, phone calls to the legislators, making sure that we do letter writing campaigns, letting legislators know that this is something that we must change, letters to the governor, more letters to the editors. These are the things that really capture the minds of legislators and judges and people that's involved. And I would say, believe it or not, when we think about, and this is not quite off course, but when you think about migrants on the borders being treated so inhumanely, this is so parallel to individuals that are in solitary confinement for days, treated the way they are treated, American citizens in holes for 20 years. And so we have to look at that and make sure that we realize that this is a violation of citizens' rights.
Okay, folks, I think that'll do it. Thank you to Anthony, and everybody take a squirt of hand sanitizer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.